Imagine making one tiny decision and accidentally changing the lives of almost every human who would ever be born after you. Some scientists even argue it made many of those lives worse. 11,000 years ago, someone picked up a handful of wild grain seeds. Instead of eating them, they planted them. That tiny decision may have helped create cities, kings, disease, inequality, taxes, and eventually, your job. How does planting a handful of seeds lead to your job? Stick with this because the answer gets stranger the deeper you go. In 1987, a biologist named Jared Diamond published an essay with one of the boldest titles you'll ever see in an academic magazine. He called agriculture, the invention every textbook treats as humanity's greatest triumph, the worst mistake in the history of the human race. Not war, not any tyrant or empire, farming. The thing that supposedly built civilization. So was he right? And if he was, why is literally every civilization on Earth still built entirely on top of his so-called mistake? Here's a thought experiment worth sitting with. Imagine an alien archaeologist explaining human history using a 24-hour clock, where 1 hour equals 100,000 years. On that clock, agriculture, cities, writing, empires, everything you think of as history fits inside the last few minutes before midnight. Almost the entire clock face is just hunting and gathering. What you consider normal human life is actually the newest, tiniest sliver bolted onto the end of something far older. So what actually went wrong the moment that sliver began? At a site in Illinois called Dickson Mounds, archaeologists studied skeletons spanning the exact moment a population shifted from foraging to full-time farming. The study has a title that says it all: Death and Disease at Dr. Dickson's Mounds. Life expectancy dropped, malnutrition rose, infectious disease spiked. Not a slow climb toward a better life, a measurable decline written directly into bone. Okay, so people got sicker. That's bad. But here's where it gets stranger, because getting sicker wasn't even the strangest thing farming did to the human body. In regions where people abandoned foraging for farming, average height crashed, in some cases from around 5'9" down to barely over 5 feet. Not across centuries, within a startlingly short window. Picture an entire village, generation by generation, visibly shrinking right at the exact moment they supposedly started living better. Wait, it gets weirder still. Some studies on early farming populations show a noticeable jump in cavities and dental problems compared to the hunter-gatherers they replaced. The people who invented civilization also essentially invented the toothache. So what actually went wrong? Variety, or rather the sudden and total lack of it. Hunter-gatherers ate dozens of different plants and animals depending on the season, on the weather, on what happened to be nearby that week. Farmers narrowed everything down to 1 or 2 staple crops, wheat, rice, corn, because those were easy to store and predictable to harvest. Predictable but fragile. Bet your entire survival on one crop, and if it fails, there's no plan B waiting in the wings.
Diamond argues that large-scale, catastrophic famines become a defining risk specifically once societies grow dependent on a small number of staple crops, in a way that simply wasn't possible for groups spreading their diet across dozens of unrelated food sources. The Irish potato famine is the textbook case, an entire population made structurally dependent on a single crop. And here's a twist almost nobody expects. Farming didn't just change what people ate, it changed how much of the day even belonged to them anymore. Imagine trading a few unhurried hours of wandering the forest for food for an unpaid job that never gave you a single weekend off for the next 11,000 years. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups have repeatedly found that foraging often required surprisingly few daily hours of labor. Fields, on the other hand, don't plant or weed themselves. But even that's not the darkest part of this story. Farming meant people stopped moving, permanently. Dense, fixed settlements packed close together, living alongside newly domesticated animals every single day, created the perfect environment for disease to spread in ways it simply couldn't before. Crowded populations, constant animal contact, water sources slowly fouled instead of abandoned every few weeks the way a mobile camp naturally would be. Many of the major epidemic diseases that later shaped human history became possible only after permanent settlements and close, constant contact with domesticated animals created the perfect conditions for them to jump from animals to people. The same invention that eventually built cities also built the conditions for humanity's first great epidemics entirely by accident, long before anyone understood what a bacteria even was. And still, somehow, that isn't even the twist that changed everything. Picture 10 people standing around one single pile of grain. 9 of them are hungry, 1 of them is holding the key to the storehouse. That's inequality in one image. Hunter-gatherer societies tend to show far less rigid hierarchy. Food gets shared. Status exists, but rarely at extremes because there's rarely a single resource worth hoarding. Once you can grow a surplus, everything changes. Surplus means storage. Storage means someone controls it. And the moment one person controls the food an entire community depends on, you get exactly what Diamond calls gross social and sexual inequality. Ownership, rigid class structure, rulers who never touch a plow. The architecture of inequality still shaping your paycheck today traces back to the moment someone learned to grow more wheat than they could eat in one season. So if farming caused all of this, why did it spread? Why didn't it just quietly disappear? Here's the part most people get wrong. Farming didn't necessarily make individual lives better, but it let a given piece of land feed far more people than hunting and gathering ever could. Over generations, farming communities grew larger, expanded outward, and often displaced the neighboring hunter-gatherers who had been living healthier, arguably freer lives right next door. It wasn't the healthier lifestyle that won, it was the one that could support the biggest population and outnumber everyone else. So if farming was already spreading, why couldn't anyone just turn back? Diamond's answer is almost cruel in its simplicity. Once a population outgrows what hunting and gathering could ever support, there's no clean way to reverse course. You cannot feed a dense settlement of thousands of people by sending everyone back out to forage. Humanity got locked in, not because farming was actually better for any single person living through it, but because there was no exit ramp left once enough people existed to make turning back mathematically impossible. Somewhere 11,000 years ago, someone planted a handful of seeds. They thought they were planting tomorrow's dinner. Instead, they planted cities, kings, taxes, pandemics, inequality, and eventually, the world you were born into.